Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of the Mac and Forth live show. My name's Carl Madden and we're here once again to talk to someone basically. Now, I want to announce straight away, fortunately, one of the pieces of kit I've been waiting for has finally arrived. My Camlink 4K has finally arrived and I'm trying it out. Even though I've had a fairly basic setup that's been running okay for the last few weeks, I changed my setup at the last moment. What kind of madman would do something as dumb as that? Speaking of which, I'd like to introduce this week our special guest, Guy Sell. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for including me in the madness. I appreciate it.
That's
And
perfectly okay.
yeah, changing things at the last minute just before you go on live on a live cast or a podcast. Totally a thing. It works.
What could possibly go wrong? That's what I have to ask myself.
Everything. Looks like I'm a little tall. I'm gonna slightly make it a little adjustment there. Ooh, maybe too much.
You are small. You're smaller than me. You're an inch smaller than me, midget.
Yeah, I know. Big Lombard.
Very true. So, welcome to the show. And
thank you.
We've known each other online. We've known each other for many, many years. You're a podcast that I'm going to say ripped some of the ideas off for Mac and Forth in the early years.
It's okay, because I took all of mine from everybody else, so it works.
Well, I didn't realise. I thought everything had to be serious until I listened to you and Gaz on your My Mac show. So it was a real eye opener.
Nothing has to be serious.
No, definitely.
Keep it light. Keep it fun.
Ah, dear. Yes, absolutely. Anyway, so yes, thanks to you, I started incorporating a bit more levity, I hope, into my show, and it's always been fun. But firstly, let's just welcome all our wonderful chat roomers out there and viewers, live viewers, so I can see, according to the chat room, that Tone's in the room, Brian's in the room, and that's pretty much it so far. They're the only ones that have actually typed anything. In fact, if you're new to viewing the show live, just write a little comment that says new, and I'll give you a little hello, because it's great to meet you, and it's great to see that you're tuning in and joining in on the fun, I hope.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Was that your Dick Van Dyke impersonation there?
Oh, well, yeah, Chim Chimney and all that, probably. So, I know it's probably not a really popular imitation of somebody from the UK, but, it is what it is, and my accents, as anyone who listens to the mymac.com podcast, are limited mostly to really bad English accents, Clouseau-ish French accents, very strict German accents, and some combinations thereof.
Oh, yes. You'll get into trouble for one of them one day, I'm sure. So starting off with our chat room, obviously we got someone called Dean Murphy. Apparently he's new to the show. I don't think so somehow, but nice try. Also join us, Jason Madden. That's my brother. He's joining us. He must be somewhere watching, obviously.
Is he a tall guy too?
He's not as tall as me. He's small, SM all. So Brian says not that new as well. We got Ron P out there. How you doing, Ron? It's great to see you here. And Graham has joined us as well. So everyone here. And obviously, as I mentioned at the start, Tone is also here. So, getting on with the show, Guy.
We have a lot of stuff.
I asked you. I create a document for these shows, and I've only done this is my third one, obviously. And the other week we did it with Dean, and we had a number of things that he wanted to pull up and show off various tools and services he used. And the week before that, it was David Dean, and we had a load of streaming services and pieces of hardware that we use for streaming. And the show notes were okay. They had a fair amount of stuff in. I asked you for show notes of all the stuff that you want to talk about today. And there's 30-odd links in there.
There's a couple.
I'm a bit worried about where to start now. But what I do want to say, or ask you rather, is all the time I've known you, and one of the longest podcasters I know, personally, I still don't know how you even got into it. How did you first discover this is something you want to do, podcasting, and how did it all kick off for you?
Well, the person that I have to give credit to or the blame to, depending on how you want to look at it, is Tim Robertson over at mymac.com. Now, he and Chad Perry actually started the mymac.com podcast back in 2004. They were like one of the first ones out there. And right around show 30, I started giving some thought to what it was. Because while I'm somewhat of a wallflower, at least I used to be, it sounded like it was something fun, something I wanted to get into. And so at the time, and this tells you how far back this goes, Dashboard had just been introduced into the Mac OS. And nowadays I say that and people are like, Dashboard?
What?
Dashboard.
I've never heard of it.
What is that? So I was doing, I went to Tim and I said, well, can I do like a segment and send you some audio? And he was like, sure. He was looking for people from the site to start to participate anyway. So I started this thing called the Dashboard Minute, which was always about 5 minutes long, which was very confusing. And I would just do a review on like 1 to 3 dashboard widgets. And my audio quality was just horrendous and changed from week to week, literally, because I really had no idea what I was doing, as compared to now, where I'm a talented and dangerous amateur, I think, when it comes to audio. But back then I really had no clue. So my audio would be like all over the place, and there would be background noise, and there would be my S's would come out in such a way that it sounded like I had a really horrible lisp. And, all of these things that you shouldn't do with audio, I not only did them, I cherished them. I relished them. I lovingly handcrafted them and brought them into my workflow. And it took me a really, really long time to get rid of some of those bad habits. But that was kind of how I started. And then we got close to the 100th episode of the MyMac podcast. And Tim had finagled to do a live show, not internet live show, but a live show out in the world at the Grand Rapids, Michigan Apple Store. And I don't remember the circumstances, but Chad couldn't make it. So I volunteered and flew from Virginia to Michigan, and Tim and I did the 100th mymac.com podcast live. And the chemistry between us was really, really good. And within just a few episodes, I was like the third co-host of the MyMac show. And then Tim got a paying gig with Otherworld Computing, and he went off to do that. And it was David Cohen and myself doing the MyMac podcast for about 15 shows. And then David had to drop out, and Tim found Gaz and brought Gaz in. Now, Gaz had been, and I'd forgotten this, but Gaz had been like a guest on the show while I was like one of the co-hosts. But, I'm a blonde from Florida, so, these things slip my mind. I have to constantly be reminded of stuff. And when Gaz and I started doing the mymac.com podcast together, within probably 2 or 3 shows, it was obvious that we had something that was really special and weird at the same time. And we have relished the weirdness ever since. We just did we just crossed the threshold of 500 weekly shows that the two of us have done together. We started in March of 2009, so over 11 years ago, that we've been doing the mymac.com podcast together.
But
that's kind of how the whole thing started.
It is crazy how it builds up over time.
It does. It does.
I mean, I've just recently clocked over 250 episodes of Mac and Forth, and it doesn't feel like anywhere near that many that I've done.
The time really does kind of fly.
It is amazing. So how did you, obviously, like when you started out, did you make mistakes at the beginning with hardware and equipment and services? Because I know I did.
Oh,
it's all the case.
Oh my God.
Because you listen to things like, so for example, I was listening to shows like Twit, and it all seemed to be very professional. They were using high-end mics, and it all sounded lovely. So, you just get the idea, I'll get a mic, I'll plug it in, and it'll sound wonderful.
Yeah, well, things never quite work out that way.
No.
I started off with a Samson CO3U USB microphone, and it was the microphone that I probably used for a couple of years, and it was always going into GarageBand. And I was constantly tweaking the settings in GarageBand, because I was looking for that. Yeah, and it's such a cliche, especially in podcasting, that deep, rich FM radio voice. You know, the one that these guys that are like 5'2", 5'3", but somehow have this deep baritone voice. And if you've ever met someone who actually does radio, every single time I've always been so disappointed, because you hear their voice and you expect them to come out looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, the big muscles and so tall and strong, and they end up looking like Don Knotts, So it's this weird mix of voice, and these are people, especially in radio, these are people that have trained all of their lives to do this kind of thing, to the point where, and Dave Hamilton from the Mac Geek Gab.
Yeah.
When he started doing this, and he's not a fan of editing. So everything that they do for the Mac Geek Gab is done completely live. So he's listening in at the same time, and latency is the killer when you're talking about audio. If what you say takes as little as a quarter of a second before you hear it in your headphones, you end up talking like this, because you sound drunk, because your brain can't quite process the fact that you're hearing back something that you just said a quarter of a second ago, and it throws you completely off. But people who have trained in radio, this is like one of the things that they deal with on a constant basis is latency, because it takes time to round trip. Round trip is what you speak into a microphone. It goes through cables, it goes through processing, it does all these things with other pieces of equipment, and then comes back into your headphones. That's a round trip. They train themselves to be able to get past the fact that they're hearing themselves a quarter second, half second, full second past when they actually say something. And it's not easy to do. I can't do it, but I'm not trained.
I had to learn that. So obviously I'm not to the degree of any kind of radio host, but when I started, because I was using software interfaces to do most of the heavy lifting, it wasn't up to, like, my PC, well, my Mac in this case, struggled back in the old days. And it was either the processor or it was the software itself, and it would introduce that tiny, tiny little bit of latency, and I would end up kind of talking like this, because it was waiting for my voice to catch up with what I was hearing.
It never does.
No, those days are gone.
It never does.
Well, they're gone for me anyway. I'm sure if you're using like slightly underpowered hardware, it probably still exists. But I mean, at the end,
if I could give new podcasters one quick piece of advice before we go on with everything else, before you start the podcast, listen to the sound of your voice. Make it sound as good as you possibly can, and then whatever device it is that you're recording into, have it set up in such a way that you can see that there's still audio happening, but don't listen to yourself, because it'll kill it. It'll kill whatever it is that you're trying to do. Listen to the other people that you're talking to. Listen for whatever music or incidentals or sound effects or whatever it is that you're doing, but your own voice, turn it off, because it's going to bring you nothing but grief.
Yes, indeed. So, what are you using nowadays? I know for a reason I asked this, because I know you have the most elaborate setup I've known very much.
It's insane.
Mine is a USB mic, this thing, Rode Podcaster, plugged in to the back of the Mac.
I had one. It's a great microphone.
And that's it, basically. I run that through Audio Hijack, and just to add a bit of compression to it, things like that. And that's all I use, really. And the compression, I'm only using it for a noise gate kind of thing, which doesn't really matter so much when you're doing a YouTube
Yeah,
video.
the good old AU Dynamics processor.
Yeah, that's the one. The stall horse, stall it.
Yeah.
Where we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it works fine. The only problem is, like I say, if you've got a PC or a Mac that's underpowered, every bit of additional software that you add to the mix is going to take up cycles on that, processor and create lag and latency. But
that's if you have a software solution.
Yeah.
I'm mostly hardware these days because of that.
And what are you
I'm
using?
I'm gonna take my camera and I'm gonna give you a quick look. A peek behind the curtain.
Okay.
And you'll see this and you'll go, what the hell is wrong with this man?
Is it like Cape Canaveral?
Here we go.
We're moving.
Oh!
This is dangerous TV.
Whoa! All right. So what we have over here. Yeah. Okay. This top bit right here.
Oh my.
Yep. That is a Behringer UMC 404 USB 2 audio interface. And the great thing about this particular piece of equipment is each input, you see the 4 inputs right there.
Mm-hmm.
Each of those inputs come across USB as separate channels in your DAW. So this, I've got a microphone here, I've got a microphone here. These two here are connected up to that mixer that you can barely see over there, that Yamaha mixer. And I mostly just use that to test like new microphones and stuff. Then underneath that, I've got a Behringer Composer Pro MDX 2600, which is a compressor / limiter / expander. And then underneath that, move some of this stuff out of the way, is the Behringer Ultra Gain Pro MIC 2000. This is a preamp. And so you see all that. Now, the way it's all connected, see if I can get myself back in frame here. Hello. The nice thing about the Behringer UMC 404 HD and the 204 HD is that they have outboard outputs, which means that it's not, you don't just connect your microphone to the interface and then that's all you can do with it. You can set up a chain to other equipment, which on the back I actually have. So I've got TRS connectors that go from a linked output to channels 1, 2, 3, and 4, or 1 and 2 in this case. And then that comes down using a split TRS cable into the compressor, which in turn, the output of the compressor goes into the preamp, which in turn comes back into the audio interface, which in turn goes into the computer. So, and this all happens very, 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 very fast. And the reason why I use something like the Behringer Mic 2200 preamp is that I like dynamic microphones. That's typically all I use. And dynamic microphones are great because they block out a lot of the background sound that you have in an untreated room. Now, I mean, I just do this in my basement, so hard drives and air conditioning and, all the other things that make up modern life in men's man caves make noise. And dynamic microphones are really, really good at rejecting that background noise. Anything that isn't like focused right into the microphone, for the most part, gets rejected. The problem with that, though, is you need a lot of gain to push these types of microphones, sometimes well over 50 dB of gain. And the interface alone, you would have to crank that almost all the way up. And the harder you push your preamp, the more noise you introduce into your signal chain. So having a preamp and also having, you can't really see it, I've got a Triton Fedhead little preamp here on the back of this Rode Pod mic, which that gives me 26 dB of gain, which goes into the preamp, which gives me another 20 to 40 dB of clean gain, which in turn goes to the UMC 404, which gives me a little more gain. And you balance all this to try to get the very best sound that you possibly can. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I keep messing with the settings, thinking if I just make this little change, it'll be perfect. And then everything just, you have like a Chernobyl meltdown here in my man cave, which really gets my wife upset.
Really? Not the cost of it all.
Yeah. Oh, no. Just it's the radiation, I think.
Oh dear. Yes, that's a lot of stuff. I mean, you've picked that up over time. This is not something you went up and bought in one weekend or anything like that.
No.
But you
actually, I mean, I used to use mixers. I used a lot of mixers, and the very first mixer I had was it was an Alesis Multimix 8 Firewire, and there's a link to it here someplace. I don't know where it is, and it was. I mean, and I'm talking going back to mid 2000s when I used this thing, and it was great because all Apple computers at the time had Firewire, and Firewire was the only way to get multi-track audio from a device into your computer and have it be on separate tracks. Firewire was the only way to go. And unfortunately, it self-destructed one time. I think it basically just got tired of hearing my voice and said, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. And just died. So then I had to get something else, and I got the USB version of it. And like most USB mixers, you have two tracks. You have two channels. You have the right channel and you have the left channel. And you can fool it a little bit by doing like a hard pan left and a hard pan right so that you can, multi-track across two channels with mono sources. But you can't really get past that with most relatively inexpensive mixers. But I kept trying with different mixers. Then after the Multimix 8, my mobile setup for a while had a Alesis Multimix 4, which I still have. It's a great little mixer for what it is. But that was, those were all like hardware solutions. Now, like you, I also went software on a number of occasions. And in the early days, Ambrosia, boy, I think I'm picking up whatever it is you had. Having trouble speaking. Ambrosia software had a couple of programs that were like must have. One of them was Soundboard, which is where the whole thing started up with Gaz and me with competing soundboards. And the other thing was Wiretap Studio. Wiretap Studio allowed you to take pretty much any source of audio, and whether it was hardware, whether it was software, didn't matter. And you could route it using Wiretap Studio from one part to another part. So I could take my microphone, I could take Soundboard, I could take Skype, I could take, all of these different programs that are generating audio and put them to different outputs that I could put onto GarageBand and my DAW and have them record on separate tracks. Multi-track audio is really, as a podcaster, is really the only way to go. I know a lot of people try to have everything on one track. Well, the problem with that is if there's an issue with someone's audio, well, you can't really do much about it because it's all mixed in together. But if everybody's on a separate track, then you can, there are tricks that you can do to fix things.
Oh, yes.
But I kept switching back and forth between software and hardware. I'd be working with hardware. It's like, oh, the hardware isn't letting me do this. Let me see if I can find a software solution. Then I'd find a software solution. Oh, this is great. And then Apple would make a change to the operating system, and Soundboard would suddenly start putting all these clinks and clanks in my audio chain. And I have to go back to hardware. Then I go back to hardware, and it was like this never-ending battle, this struggle for dominance between software and hardware. And I finally kind of have a pretty good mix now. On the software side of things, what I do, now you saw the hardware. Once it leaves the UMC 404 audio interface and comes into the computer, then I'm using a program from Rogue Amoeba, which is very similar in functionality to Ambrosia Software's Wiretap Studio, where you can take different audio sources, whether it's hardware, whether it's software, and route them internally in your computer and have separate tracks that you can push into a DAW. And it's great. So between, everybody used to use Ambrosia software stuff. Now everybody's pretty much using Rogue Amoeba, because mostly once 10.7 came out, Ambrosia software was never able to get all their stuff to work.
I'm assuming you're talking about Audio Hijack, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Audio Hijack from Rogue Amoeba, Soundboard from Rogue Amoeba, Farrago from Rogue Amoeba, Fission from Rogue Amoeba, Sound Source from Rogue Amoeba. These are all programs that just do magic within the Mac OS for audio, and it's amazing what these programs could do. And the crew at Rogue Amoeba and Paul Kafarsis and all those guys have created this amazing suite of software. And I don't get paid to talk about Rogue Amoeba, but I push their solutions a lot, mostly just because they work, and they work really, really well. And they have certain bundles that you can find. I couldn't tell you what they are off the top of my head, but at the very least, if you want to really get serious about podcasting, you really need to have number one, Audio Hijack Pro, which is it's so much better than it used to be. You've got a screenshot, I think, of what it used to look like.
Yes. Let me. You just caught me unawares there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. This is what it used to look like, and it worked, but it was a royal pain in the neck. And now, this is what it looks like now, and it's so much better. It's amazing software. What Audio Hijack does in relation to your audio, whether it's from hardware, whether it's from software, it's magic. And then the routing capabilities of Loopback, and of course the soundboard functionality of Farrago, and the editing part of you can set up chapters and all this other stuff in Fission. And to be able to manipulate individual audio sources using Sound Source, I think that's what it's called. Is that what it's called? Sound Source? So. Okay.
Yeah.
It's basically, it's a little thing that sits in your menu bar on the Mac. And anytime you introduce a new audio source, if it's too loud while you're doing something else, you just go into that. I'm going to turn that down a little bit. And it's completely independent from how sound is routed using like audio MIDI setup and all the rest of that. This in the utilities folder, which I'm having serious problems with every single time I start up. I don't know what Apple has done. Every time I start up Skype or Discord or any of these VoIPs, all of a sudden people are going, well, I can't hear you. So I go over to audio MIDI setup, and it's basically taken because my UMC 404 HD from Behringer is set up as an audio source in audio MIDI. Well, it like halves the output without any input from me. It says, well, that's too loud, so we're going to cut it in half, which is, I guess, okay, except people might want to hear me or not.
Swings roundabouts.
It does. So what else you got for me?
Well, no, I mean, the only problem is anyone who wants to learn or start doing podcasting or any kind of like broadcasting is that sounds incredibly expensive and complicated, everything involved there. But I don't think
it doesn't have to be.
No, it doesn't have, and that's what I'm saying. I reckon. So what would you suggest to people who wanted to do a podcast now? What, taking advantage of all the different services out there now, some web-based purely, and all the different technology that's come along and the services and the hardware. What would you suggest people look at? And just before we carry on, right, we got Brian here saying having another podcast on means they can carry on the show and do most of the talking. That's absolutely right. One thing you need to do. One thing you need to do. What? If you're a podcaster, you need to be able to fill void.
Yeah,
and you need to do it a lot sometimes as well. What else have we got?
Depending on that's not a problem with me though.
No, true. Brian also said having a podcast about podcasting is so meta. Well, it's only podcasting this week, you see, because we're going to have. I hope to have different people on about different things. But yes, it is definitely podcasting this week, and I thought Guy would be the perfect person to come on and talk about that. And just one I've just spotted from Alan. He just says his watch just told him that Cole just won a stand award. Did he nip away to the loo after asking that last question? To which Tone responds, "'Tis why the camera was just on Guy, clearly."
Exactly.
They're seen through the curtain.
I know. It's like there's what do they call that? I can't think of what they call that. There's like a term for that when you peek behind the curtain.
Peeking behind the curtain.
Yeah, there's something else, but don't peek behind the curtain. Don't do that.
Ignore the man behind the curtain.
Like, share, subscribe. Okay.
So today, if someone was setting up a podcast today and they wanted to give it a shot, what would you suggest?
And not spend a ton of money.
Not spend a ton of money. What would you suggest the bare minimum to do? Because actually, thinking about it, you can do it basically from your phone nowadays, if it's an iPhone or an iPad.
You could, but it's going to sound like crap.
Well, yes. If you just use the iPad and the phone alone, maybe.
Yeah.
So what?
Assuming that you're doing it from a computer with a USB input, and you want to just kind of get your feet wet, but you want to get gear that if you want to go up to the next level, that you can still use that gear. The first thing that a lot of people talk about, and there's a reason why a lot of people suggest this, is because they're great microphones. The Audio-Technica ATR 2100 and the same Audio-Technica ATR 2005. Basically, it's the same microphone. What the great thing about this microphone is not only when you buy it, do they give you everything that you need. They give you the microphone. They give you a stand. They give you an XLR to XLR cable. They give you a mini USB to USB cable. God, what else? That's basically all you need. And then you get this microphone, you plug it into your computer, and then you set it up as an audio source in GarageBand. And so for roughly, and before we go any farther, the prices that you're going to see right now are ridiculously high, mostly because of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So people are staying at home, and a lot of people are looking to buy this stuff. And of course, supply outstrips demand, or demand outstrips supply. And so the prices rise up. A couple of months from now, when things finally settle down, these prices will come down. Typically, the 2100 2005 is usually in the $70 to $90 range for the microphone. But again, that includes everything. That's all you really need, other than maybe headphones to do a podcast. You have GarageBand on your Mac. It's a perfectly capable DAW. The other microphone that a lot of people talk about, and it's essentially also the very same microphone, is the Samson Q2U, which I think is probably made in the very, very same factory, because if you look at it from the backside where all the connectors are, it looks completely identical to the other two. And to my ears, I can't really tell any major difference between these three. So whichever one is the least expensive is the one that I would go to. The stand that is included, if you want to go up just a little bit more, the stand that's included with that is kind of crap. The one that I've found that works really well, and I use it in my mobile kit, is the Hamilton New Era tabletop mic stand. It's available from Amazon. It kind of telescopes up and down. You can bring it up a little bit higher. And the other thing that I would also recommend is a shock mount and filter. And I didn't put the name of who made this. There may not actually be a name for who made this, but it's basically it's a shock mount that you can use with any dynamic or condenser microphone that kind of fits the Shure SM58, 57 mold, where it's like the kind of microphones that you see on stage. Well, this little shock mount basically prevents taps on the desk and things like that from reaching in and being heard through your microphone. It also allows you to have a pop filter on the front, so you take care of your pop and your take all that away. And it's actually it's a great little addition to like the Hamilton New Era tabletop mic stand. This is here we go. Yeah, that's a little better. It's like I kept going, I'm out of frame. There's someone talking, but I can't see his face. Not necessarily a bad thing. So for about $100 post-COVID ridiculous prices, you can get a microphone, you can get a decent stand along with a shock mount and a pop filter for about $100. And that's really all that you need. Well, I keep saying that that's all you need, except for this other thing, which is headphones.
That's your typical hobby, though.
Yeah. And the reason why you want headphones, number one, if you're doing this with another person over Skype or Discord or Zoom or whatever your preferred method, your preferred VoIP is, you don't want their sound, the words that they're saying to come out of the speakers of your computer that you can hear them, because if you can hear them, so can your microphone.
Exactly.
And that can set up what's called a feedback loop, and you really don't want to deal with feedback. So having headphones or something like, earpods, or AirPods, whatever they call them, is kind of necessary, and you don't need to go super high end. Both Carl and I kind of like the Sony MDR 7506 headphones, but one that I used to use quite a bit was the Audio Technica ATH series of headphones. The 20s, 30s, and 40s are reasonably priced. The 20s and 30s are well under $100, and they're very well put together. They last a long time and they sound pretty good. And that's all you need for like a relatively inexpensive setup. And instead of you're well under $200.
So that's quite reasonable. But as we say, you can just do it with your phone if you so wish. I mean, it's not going to sound as good, obviously. No. There are some decent audio apps, some recorder apps now on the iPhone, actually. And what I've done in the past, when I've been out and about and I couldn't figure out how to do an outside broadcast, I think back to definitely when the Apple Watch launched, and you could go to the Apple stores and try them on, do your fitting experience, if you remember when that was going on a few years back. So what we did there is we both had iPhones. This is me and my friend Alex, and we put like a mic sock over the bottom of our iPhones. I think was
it a mic sock or was it just a sock?
It was a mic sock. We wanted to look at least semi-professional while we did it. So we just put that over there, obviously to stop the wind, any wind shear going on. And then we just used I can't remember, it was like a Pro Audio Recorder or something. It was free in the App Store. And you just crank up the bit rate so it sounded nice. He spoke into his phone, I spoke into my phone, and then in post, in GarageBand, as it was back then that I was using, I just synced them both up, and you couldn't tell. And it sounded wonderful. And I guess if you're in a quiet room, you could probably get away with doing that. But of course, it's not just the expense that's the problem with a podcast. It's the subject matter. You've got to constantly come up with... And everyone has an idea. Oh, yeah, I'll do a podcast about X, Y, and Z, which is great for week 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's week 5 and 6, unless you're doing a series when you've got a definite
year 11.
time. Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. And then you have to decide if you're going to make it a solo podcast, or you're going to have guests on, or you're going to have a regular host or regular co-hosts. And everything has merit. For example, if you do it solo, it's up to you. You decide when you record. You can do all the things that you want to do. You don't have to check with anyone. You don't have to rely on anyone. It's just, I want to record today, you do it straight away. If you've got a co-host, regular co-host, everyone has to work together to come together, agree to come together at a certain time of day. Everyone has to be informed about what you're going to talk about. So it's a bit of a problem sorting everything out and making sure everyone's on the same page. And if you're getting guests on, you obviously have to forewarn them like basically how you're going to do the show, and you have to make them, because you're not going to do gotcha journalism on a podcast, really. Not when you're starting out. No one will ever come on your show again. So you have to be inviting and play by their rules to a certain extent, based on what they will be willing to talk about and what they won't be willing to talk about. You've got to respect that to start with. Once you've made a name...
Or they won't come back.
Or they won't come back, and, your name will be mud. Once you've made a name for yourself, you can go and try and do gotcha journalism if you want. You can try. I'm not sure you'll get much success later on down the road. But, and it's all these other things that you have to think about. And, but it's so rewarding to do as well. Especially, you start, you get very little listenership, which I still get very little listenership. But the point is, I still enjoy doing it, and that's why I carry on doing it. And that's why I'm going to keep searching and doing things like this, adding the video aspect. And it's to have fun. It's certainly not to get rich, and it's certainly not to get famous.
Yeah.
You got to put.
If you go into podcasting believing that this is going to be a new source of revenue for you, you're making a horrible, horrible mistake. And you should probably not buy any microphones, not buy any gear, because you are going to fail. You can't go into something like this and expect to be an instant success. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of work. And the number one thing that you have to have is a passion for the topic that you've chosen to talk about. Because if you don't have a passion for that subject, like me and microphones, I love talking about microphones. I could sit here and spend hours with Carl, and we have in the past, talking about microphones and gear and all of this other stuff. But if I come across it, I've got this, there's this stuff that's over here and it does things, and I connect them and then I go into the software and I do this other. What's the name of the software? I don't know. It's my neighbor set it up for me, and I just do those things. Well, it becomes very apparent early on that you have no passion for the topic. You're not. I was going to say not knowledgeable about the topic, but that's never stopped me before. And you really have to project. You have to take whatever the topic is and make it exciting, not just for yourself, but for the people that you're telling about it. And if there's one thing that I'm really good at when it comes to all of this stuff is I have a passion for it. I love to talk about it. I love to help people that also want to do this. And I've got some videos up on YouTube that show you how to use Audio Hijack Pro and Loopback and Skype and GarageBand and Farrago, and have all of these things together. And if you just go to my YouTube channel, Guy Searle, or I may have posted them as Vert Shark, but just look me up over on YouTube. You'll find the videos that are related to that, and it'll show you step by step how to use Audio Hijack and Loopback and Farrago and Skype, and not only GarageBand, but any DAW it is that you want to use. Put all these things together to create multi-track audio. And it's all there. It's all for free. And just because I love doing it, and I love it when somebody comes back to me and says, I didn't know how to do this. I watched your video, and now I know how. That's so rewarding.
It is. I might start,
not monetarily, but it's like, okay.
I might start doing that on the Mac and Forth YouTube channel, because I've learned so much stuff doing the video and stuff I just take for granted now.
But you can't do it live though.
No.
You cannot do how-tos live because it does not work.
Be a challenge.
It doesn't work.
Be a challenge. Actually, Alex has pointed out that you can get rich if you're already rich and famous. Then podcasting will probably be good for you as well. So there is that aspect. And it's really annoying when my
really good friend Alex, you should become a patron of mine over there on patreon.com/MacParrot.
So it's really annoying.
Teach you all kinds of stuff.
One of the annoying aspects of podcasting is when you get the big boys come in and they just Apple treats them with welcome arms, because they're going to get so many downloads, and they promote their stuff on the front page and all that. That's frustrating as hell, but what are you going to do? That's the way it is, I'm afraid.
Well, there's nothing that you can do. again, you have to, if you're going to go into podcasting, do it because you want to do a podcast. And there should be no other reason beyond wanting to do a podcast and wanting to put your knowledge and information out there for somebody else to get. Because if you start off in any other way, you're going to fail. You're going to pod fade 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes.
Pod fade. I've never heard that before. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now, if you've got any questions out there, if you're listening, just put a Q at the front of your question, and we'll get to it. But I'm about to ask Guy about something that he's been going on about for years. But in the meanwhile, we got a question from Alan. Do Guy and Cole listen back to their own podcasts?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Gaz and I, for the MyMac.com podcast, we do kind of an after show. You know, the stuff in between the segments. The MyMac.com podcast, let me see how many times I can say that in this segment, is split into 3 different segments. We have the beginning part where we're like, hey, how you doing? And then the second part, which is supposed to be the serious part. And then the third part where, you know, our picks and tips and, you know, how to get a hold of us and all the rest of that stuff. And if you listen past the outro, there's usually about 5 to 20 minutes of stuff that Gaz and I are just talking in between the segments before we started or after we got finished. And I will very, 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 very carefully edit those bits, take out any swearing or stuff that, you know, I think is going to be embarrassing to either Gaz or myself, but that I still think are funny and, you know, worth putting out there. And I listen back to find any mistakes that I might make. Now, before I got busy doing the Mac to the Future live cast that I do on Wednesday nights with David Ginsburg and Warren Sklar, or Guy's Daily Drive that I do 2 to 4 times a week in my car, which is weird. I had a lot more time on my hands. So I would record the podcast with Gaz, and then I would find an excuse to drive someplace after I had it edited that would take me an hour to go there and get back so I could listen to the entire podcast. And if I would find anything, then I would go back into editing and I would make changes. But now I don't always have that luxury. And I'll do like a quick run through to make sure that the segments are right, the graphics are correct for each one of the little segments, but I don't always catch all of the mistakes. And you and I were talking about this yesterday, where there was this long, like 10-minute gap between the end of the show and the outtakes. And there was a little more audio at the very end of it. And the only way I found out, I think it was actually Simon Parnell that was like, you realize that there's like this big, long, empty gap in your show. And it's like, oh, is there? I didn't know that. And the problem with that is once it's out there, it's out there. And you can't normally pull it back in and make changes. People will already have it, especially depending on how popular your show is. So sometimes you just kind of, you know, shrug your shoulders, grin and bear it.
Absolutely. I mean, I do listen back, but I don't listen to the whole thing. I just listen to if I got my level set properly, and then if I've messed up, I make a note. Like recently, for example, I've been noticing that when I've been doing a show, after I finished it and edited and posted it, everybody else was sounding hot. And I mean, like, over-modulated kind of thing. And I was thinking, what the hell have I done? I haven't done anything different. And then I realised what it was. When I was using Discord, there's a setting in Discord, and the maximum for listening to what, you know, your guests are saying doesn't go up to 100. It goes up to 200% volume. Yeah. So it was... So because I hadn't been paying attention, I'd been importing, like, their volume at 198%. And then it was going into everything and just being crushed by the compressor. And it sounded awful, but I fixed it now. So hopefully the last show should have sounded much better. But it does. Alan actually does go on to say, he does when he's on the show. I don't think it's egotistical and narcissistic. I just find I missed a lot of what the other co-hosts said. And that's true. I listen back and sometimes I go, I don't remember saying that.
I'm sorry. What did you just say, Carl?
Exactly. Because you're thinking of you're listening.
Yeah.
You're thinking of what to say next. You got to move the story along or the pieces along. But I mean, it's all good fun and it's an experience. Now, what I want you to do, since we got about another 10 minutes or so, Guy, is I want you in a space of 10 minutes to basically condense something that you've been banging on about for about 10 years.
Oh, sure. That'll be easy.
So there's rumours now coming out that is it next week? The week after next, at WWDC, Apple is going to make an announcement where they are going to supposedly announce they're going to move from Intel-based chips to ARM-based chips. And Mac OS is going to now function, or will start functioning on ARM processors sometime in 2021. This is something, you are the first person I ever used to, I'm sure other people were going on about it at the time, but you, from your earlier shows, I remember you saying that this should be happening because iOS, the chips in iPads and iPhones are getting so fast, so quick that you're saying at some point they've got to do
multi-core.
And then when Intel went off their roadmap and it got so slow in producing their new processors, they just basically stuck. Oh, well, we can't like get the size down. We'll just put more cores in. Put more cores in.
Yeah,
Moore's
law got broken.
Yeah, basically.
Moore's law got broken. And for people who don't know what Moore's law, it was in essence, and I'm sure I don't have this exactly right, that about every 18 months processor speed would double. That was Moore's law. Well, they hit, there was the push to make processors as thin as possible. And once they got down below, what was it, about 30 nanometers, that it just, they couldn't crank any more speed out because the pathways required to, you need, it sounds weird to talk about chips and talk about bandwidth, but that's when you're talking about moving information from one side of a processor to another side of the processor, well, that involves pathways, that involves bandwidth, and how quickly that happens and whether or not there's any cross connects between those pathways, which can corrupt the data. You essentially, you get to the point where you can't make them any smaller and still double the processing speed. So what they did instead, and what AMD and Intel and really ARM as well did instead was instead of trying to make them even faster, they just started adding more cores. And in the early days of adding more cores, it was kind of pointless because most software wasn't set up to use multiple cores. And it's only been over the last probably 5 to 7 years that more and more software has become multi-core aware and able to use multiple cores. So Moore's law as it stood is broken, but we keep getting more and more powerful processors because they keep adding more and more cores. Or they'll add double they'll put two processors in place of where one used to be. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter because it all has to do with how many cores there are. And your computer basically determines, well, this core isn't busy, so I'm going to send it over to this core, and it all just kind of meets back up in the middle at the end of the process. But when Apple bought that company that was an ARM manufacturer, made their own custom silicon using the ARM process, and they started using those processors in iPads and they started using them in iPhones, it struck me that, well, as these ARM chips become more and more powerful, why are they continuing to use Intel? Let's go ahead and crank up the speed, add more processors, however many you need to do, because if there's one thing that Apple loves to do is to keep control of the entire process of manufacturing, software, hardware, all of that stuff. They like to keep all of that in-house. And it seems like every 20 years or so, whoever it is that's making their processors pisses them off to the point where like, well, we're going to go over here now. And one of the things that kind of surprised me was that they didn't buy AMD when AMD was so cheap. But instead, of course, they went to ARM. So I was banging on and on and on and on for years about how Apple should go to ARM and why are they still doing this. And in 2018, when it had been 5 years since there'd been a Mac Pro update and 4 years since a Mac Mini update, and it just seemed like all of the various Macs that Apple were producing were getting farther and farther away from being updated. It was like, well, that's what they're doing. They're going to announce that everything is going to move to ARM, and I was getting really excited about it. And then Apple finally released in December of last year the Mac Pro, which was this insane computer, Intel Xeon processor, and then you throw in the iMac Pro in there as well. And these are machines that you can spend $60,000 on or more. It's a significant amount of money to spend on a computer.
It's a chunk.
And once they updated the Mac Pro and they had the iMac Pro and they had switched to whatever the latest processors were from Intel, my whole thinking was, well, they're gonna stick with ARM, or I'm sorry, they're gonna stick with Intel.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that kind of had my thinking that they were going to do that was when they introduced the iPad OS. They basically took the iPad and said, well, this is more of a computer than it is a communication device. So even though it's still running on the bones of iOS, it's doing so much more than what iOS can do because it's got all the built-in features of what they're throwing into iPads now. So I turned like 180 degrees around on it thinking, well, there's no way that Apple's going to switch from Intel now for the Mac. And then I guess it was about 6 months ago, all of these analysts and a bunch of the Mac News websites started talking about, well, it's starting to look like Apple's going to switch to ARM. And I was sitting there thinking, well, welcome to 2016, you sons of...
No.
I mean, I was talking about... Yeah, I know. I was talking about this years ago. And everyone said, you're mad. And maybe I was back then. But to me, right now, and we'll find out a week from Monday when they have... Because, WWDC is coming on the 22nd, I think, of June.
Mm-hmm. Monday week.
And the keynote that they're going to be doing is going to be open to everyone. It's at 10 a.m. Monday the 22nd in California, which means it's going to be 1 p.m. here on the East Coast of the United States, and it's going to be 6 p.m. your time. But it's going to be live for everyone. Now, the rest of the conference, of course, you have to be a developer and you have to pay for all that stuff. But the main thing that I think everyone is going to be looking at is going to be this keynote. Because with everything that's going on right now, it almost seems like the tech world is holding their breath. They're waiting for someone, and whether it's Apple or Google or Facebook or whoever, somebody to come up with the next big thing. And nobody is doing it. The phones look the same from year to year. Tablets look the same from year to year. There's really, they keep going on about AR and VR, but frankly, I think it's like this generation's 3D television. Who cares?
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Now,
so we'll find out next Monday whether or not Apple is actually going to go to ARM and whether I'll have to eat my words.
Yes. Well, I can see.
Wouldn't be the first time.
I can see the appeal for Apple to do it because they want to own the entire stack. So, but as Alex points out, surely if Apple are going to use their own chips, it'll have to be an arm and a leg chips because they won't be cheap.
No.
So
they're not chicken.
They're not. Now, if you're watching the video, you might have noticed that my light has gone mad because some reason the sun, because I didn't put my blind down, which is a rookie mistake, I know, has just hit a certain point and is blasting into my room and blowing out this entire section of my face. And because my camera's on manual settings, it won't adjust. So sorry about that for the last minute. But here, lesson learned. Next week, I know to pull the blinds down a little bit. So,
well, what you need is to always have the blinds down and then to get some of these LED
I got them, but
light
they can't
panels.
compete against a big glowy ball in the sky. So, and it's very rare,
Yeah.
although this year it's been quite common, for us to get the big glowy ball thing in the sky in the UK. It's normally
What?
raining. Oh, well. Yeah, high key, it's fashionable, as Alex says. He's a photographer,
Yeah.
he'd know. So there you go.
Oh, I love my wife and I we honeymooned in the UK, which I know sounds weird, but people who know me, they'll like, yeah, I can see Guy doing that. Yeah, totally do that. I love the UK. I've spent quite a bit of time over there in the 80s, 90s. I haven't been there since 92, so I guess it's been 28 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I have such fond memories of spending time there. My brother was stationed at Lakenheath Air Force Base, the NATO base at that side of London. And I know it's going to sound, but between podcasting with Gaz and talking with you and talking with so many of the other people in the UK, I almost feel like the UK is like a second home, even though I haven't, that home that you're like, well, I should go back over there sometime, but you just end up not doing it. But I love going to the UK. All of you guys in the UK, thank you so very much for just being you.
Should come back. I'll buy you a beer somewhere.
Sounds good.
The trip.
We'll go to Macy's. We'll go to Macy's behind Selfridges there in London.
Okay, I've never been there, but okay. But if anyone's got any questions they want to ask, please put them in the chat room now, because we're going to wrap things up at this end. So, Guy, what plans have you got? Obviously, you don't only do My Mac, as we mentioned at the start. You also do Mac to the Future, which is well, how can I describe it? It's a Facebook Live event, isn't it?
Yeah. It's an event. All right. When I first started looking at doing live cast, now I don't have a really nice camera like you do. I just have this Logitech 930, and it's okay. It's not a great webcam. It's kind of the standard that a lot of people use. I would prefer to have something like what you use. I would just need to have more room here on my desk because it's very crowded for some reason. I don't know why. So I do that with Warren Sklar and David Ginsburg, and we just cover, some of the various Mac topics that's going on and just have a good time with it. And again, that's got to be the number one focus. You have to enjoy it. The other thing I do, and I kind of got this idea from watching a show called Car Talk, which I think originated over in the UK.
Yeah.
Where you sit in your car and you have like interviews with other people, except, who would want to sit in a car with me and be interviewed? Plus, I don't have the budget to have like multiple cameras set up and microphones set up all over the car. So I was using, what was it? I had this weird little camera. It was a cheap not webcam, sports cam that I used for a while. And I tried various microphones. I tried lavalier mics. I tried, there's one called the Samson Go, which I used to clip to my sun visor in the car. But for the most part, these were all condenser microphones. And condenser microphones are great if you're in a studio environment, because you can really, really tone in and dial in the sound that you want. And because it just brings in everything, which was the problem, because I'm in a car with a little 4-cylinder engine that's buzzing along and it's picking up everything. So I eventually decided, I tried a bunch of different things, and I eventually decided, you know what, it's not making that much of a difference. So I've got my new iPhone SE, and I've got a mirror mount that I've got set up with various, GoPro-ish sports cam gear to hang things from my mirror, and then a jelly clamp mount that holds the phone. And I go to Facebook Live. I set the phone up, go to Facebook Live. I hit start, and I just record with the microphone that's in the iPhone. And the audio from Guy's Daily Drive pretty much sounds like garbage. But I'm recording a podcast in my car while I'm driving to work or coming back from work or just being out and about. And I've actually gotten some crap for it. Well, you should just be paying attention to driving. But here's the thing. If you have somebody else in the car and you're just chatting with them in the car, how distracted are you from what it is you're doing?
I've heard this. I've heard the argument against this though is if there's two people in a car, even if they're chatting, there's two sets of eyes on the road.
Yeah, okay. But if you watch Guys Daily Drive,
a phone call would be the same. So,
yeah, it's very, very rare when I'm like, let's talk about things on Guys Daily Drive today. I'm not looking at the camera.
No,
I am driving the car. I'm looking around, and if you listen to the show, there will be times I'll be like, well, hold on a second. I've got to deal with this thing that's going on.
Listeners. Sometimes
I do.
He says,
there are people.
Mouth.
There are people that drive here in Northern Virginia. It's actually worse in Florida, but there are people that drive in Northern Virginia. I hate them.
Now,
I want them to die.
Now,
and I think that they should just go away.
Now, we have got some questions, so fairly quick responses for these. Otherwise, we'll run out of time too much. Okay, so the first one from Alex. How would you go about publicizing your podcast? Creation seems to be the easiest bit.
It's not. Creation is not the easiest bit. But for publicizing, I mean, it's all the various sort. Number one, don't get taken in by Facebook saying, well, we can put an ad for your podcast up in front of, 500,000 people, because those ads are crap. Seriously. Unless you are advertising something that a lot of people want, it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. You kind of have to build your audience organically. Or in the case of the MyMac.com podcast, have one handed to you that somebody else built up organically. But for Guys Daily Drive and for the Mac to the Future podcast, the audio version, which I have up on the Guys Daily Drive feed for both Guys Daily Drive and the Mac to the Future podcast, which you can find if you go, just look up Guys Daily Drive in the podcatcher of your choice, they'll be there. But I don't do separate feeds for those. I just pump them all through the same feed because honestly, I'm not enough of a name to spend the kind of money that would be necessary to have all these separate feeds. So if you like listening to Guys Daily Drive, listen to Guys Daily Drive. If you just like listening to the Mac to the Future live cast, the audio version of it that I do on Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. on Facebook, hint, hint, then just listen to that and ignore all the rest of it. So, pick and choose. And the other thing is, of course, depending on how many friends tell all of your friends on Facebook, all of your Twitter friends, and convince them to tell other people that they know. So, and this is how you grow your show organically. And that's really the only way to go, unless you are part of some big podcasting conglomerate that is going to, pump it out to like all these different places that have a much bigger audience than you do. Then, don't worry about how many people are listening to your show. Just keep doing what it is you're doing.
Well, actually, strangely enough, this next question runs into that. How important are downloading, listening stats? Do you keep tabs on that? Is it even possible to get an accurate picture?
Yes and no. That's a difficult question because if you look at your downloads, that's not really reflective of how many people have downloaded your show, because there are like Google, for example, will download your show. Various other search engines will download your show so that they can, especially if it's not copywritten or protected in any way, they'll look to, well, can we use this? Can we use it? How can we use this to advertise something to somebody else? They'll try to use your content to help themselves. And it's like, okay, that's the price you pay for having Google and, Microsoft Bing and all these other search engines. So you can pretty much guesstimate that in my mind, about 3/4 of the downloads that you have are probably actually from real live people. Now, how much they have listened to the show is almost impossible to tell with most podcast hosts because I don't think they really keep track of it. Now, if you're doing video, that's a whole different thing because Google and YouTube they do keep track.
They love that stuff.
Yes, they do. So depending on what it is that you're doing, you can go into your YouTube account and you can find out, well, 40 people downloaded the Mac and Forth show live with Guy as compared to the 2,300 people that did it before, because Guy's an idiot, so who wanted to download it anyway. But it'll say, all right, those 200 people downloaded and listened to it for 5 minutes before they realized it was me, and then they went off to watch cat videos or something. But YouTube will tell you how long these people listened, and you can use some of those statistics if you want to set up, advertising or monetization. You can use those statistics to kind of help push your show out there.
Mm-hmm. Tone suggests as well, probably the best way to get promoted is to spread the word and appear on someone else's show, which is absolutely true. But you have to get permission for that. They don't necessarily invite you on just because.
Yeah, don't do one of these. Don't do this. So Carl's talking on the show. Hey, everyone, listen to the MyMac.com podcast.
Just
don't do that.
It's quite tricky to get invited onto other people's show. And the one final question here is, what do your family members think about your podcasting activities?
They ignore it to
absolutely
to the point of irrelevance.
That is it.
They get enough of me. Imagine, here's the thing. I can be a difficult person to deal with because I'm loud, I'm obnoxious, and I'm opinionated and all the rest of that stuff. And my family has dealt with this now for going on 30 years. I've been married for almost 28 years. So why would they want to, they have to deal with me every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're at nighttime when I'm finally asleep, they're probably like, oh, thank God he's finally asleep. That pillow is looking so inviting right now, just right over the face. So when it comes to podcasting, especially, the kind of techie stuff that I do, they don't want to hear it. So I don't worry that much about talking, briefly talking about my wife. I don't give a whole lot of detail about her. I don't give a whole lot of detail about my two sons. I will, like my son Peter just had his birthday. Happy birthday, Peter! If you ever watch this, I'm guessing you won't, but if you do, hey, happy birthday. But for the most part, they don't listen.
Yeah, same here, I think, on the whole.
Yeah.
So it's just the way it is, isn't it? So I guess that's pretty much our show today, Guy. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your knowledge of all the equipment and podcast
But there's all
services.
This stuff about microphones.
I know.
And
I did say you didn't need to go into that much depth about it. But what we can do now is you can, once again, obviously show us, tell us where we can get hold of you. And obviously that's your Twitter handle there on the screen. But also all these other places that you use.
So very many places. You can follow me on the Twitters. I have 2 Twitter accounts, VertShark and MacParrot. I keep waiting to hear Gaz go, squawk! You can email me, guy@mymac.com. You can catch me over there on the YouTubes. Just look up my name, Guy Serle, or VertShark. I've been kind of tagging everything over the last 6 months or so to VertShark as well. Let's see, what else? There's the Mac to the Future livecast and Guy's Daily Drive are available in a single feed through the podcatcher of your choice. There's vertshark.com. My newly non-eye bleeding redesign of my website. It's much cleaner than it used to be. And all of the stuff that I basically do, you can find there. The audio links, the video links. I've started doing the video with the mymac.com podcast. It's kind of separate from the stuff that's at mymac.com. Mostly, I think, because Tim would be kind of like, you know what, I host all this stuff, so I don't want all the video as well. But I kid a lot. I kid a lot with Tim. But if it wasn't for Tim Robertson, I wouldn't be doing any of this. So every chance I get, I always like to say thank you to Tim Robertson for inviting me along on this wonderful journey through mymac.com.
So now we know who's to blame.
Oh, and Carl.
That's right. So thank you very much for joining us, Guy, like I say. And if you're watching this video and you've not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. It will keep you informed of all the updates that we do. What is it? Share, and subscribe.
Like, share, subscribe.
There you go.
Ring that bell.
The mantra. So we'll be back again next week with someone. I've got no idea who it will be at this point in time, although I might go through and share all the stuff that I've been using here in the last few weeks, just in case anyone's interested, or I might be able to find someone to come on and
I'd
talk
be
to us
interested.
all. That's jolly good then. Well, that might be going. It's definitely going to happen at some point because I want to share all this stuff. I'm waiting for one more piece of kit now to arrive, which should be coming on Tuesday. So then that should be pretty much it. And hopefully I can block out the sun for next time. But there you go. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope you have a fantastic what's remaining of the weekend. And until next time, when we all meet again, please, everybody out there, as always, stay safe and just please be nice to each other. Bye.
Bye.